So what do you see when you see a piece of furniture like this? You just see an old, outdated, does it have any use anymore piece of furniture? But can you see beyond that? Can you see what is underneath all that old stain, all the damaged? Can you see the beauty underneath? Nowadays, when a real wood find is a unique find, I was super happy to come across this piece.
Hi guys, welcome to the channel. It's Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab. Thank you for hopping on and checking out what I am up to. So in today's video, I'm working through my hoard, my stash of furniture pieces, trying to weed out pieces I think I will never get to, weeding out pieces that are just too big or not trending right now. You know, it's kind of like that beginning of the year clean out, spring clean early. So in today's video, I am sharing with you a small little furniture piece, chest of drawers. And yes, sometimes when you get all that stain off there and you want to leave something natural, the nakedness is not necessarily what you want to see.
So let's get this started by removing this old hardware. Well, this was not this dresser's first hardware change, was it? There's still one hole left behind. So now it's time to see what's all underneath, all those scrapes, all the dents, the gouges. Can I get the stain off and the polyurethane? When you get to pieces like this and you start sanding on them and you really start seeing the details, you would think, oh, it's a manufactured piece, but actually this was a handmade with somebody's love and care piece. So first things first is I find these older pieces have lots of polyurethane on them, or shellac, some older top coat that is not always the funnest to get off. A lot of times you have to spend the time just getting over the brush strokes and the drips and runs to get down underneath what is underneath. And as you see, even though I got the top coat and the stain off, there's still damage to the wood of this piece. You can see where it wasn't the original hardware, but it still bleached out the wood, probably the chemical reaction with the metal and the wood. So now, once you get that done, you have to kind of rethink, because I wanted this to be a natural piece. Oh, but wait, I'm not quite done with all the sanding that I need to do. We have a little artist that must have drawn inside of the drawer, so the easiest is why I have the sander out to go ahead and get that sanded off. And the funny thing is, for a moment, I'm like, what are those white things as I'm sanding? Apparently, there was some rice. Yes, it was rice, y'all, that was stuck in the slats that you did not see when I first vacuumed the piece out. So not that the original hardware wasn't the original hardware, I have 3 holes that I need to fill. So I'm really starting to rethink how I'm going to make this transformation. Just because you bought a piece in your original idea, once you start working on the piece and you start sanding on the piece, yeah, a lot of times you have to rethink. Just because you have an inspiration when you see the piece doesn't mean it's what it's going to become. So now what do I do at this point? I wanted to have a natural stained wood piece, but look at this. I got gouges. I've got bleach marks from where the hardware was. I have 3 holes instead of 2 where we removed the hardware. So my first thought is I still want to do something more of a staining look, but I have lots of problems to deal with. So my first problem is I'm going to go ahead and even out the porosity. This is dry wood now, it's raw wood. I know that if I put stain on here, if I try to bleach out the spots, all I'm going to do is make them, the stain would darken them up and the bleach would just still make those lighter spots even lighter. But one of the details I fell in love with this piece was this on the side. This little detail of patching wood together, paneling. I don't really, it looks like to me it's patched pieces of wood that made this beautiful little chest of drawers. So same thing, I needed to sand all that down, but luckily there's not as many scrapes or bruises or staining that's going on this piece. And actually, for some reason, the drawers took a lot more to sand off than the side of the piece. As you can see, it's just coming right off. It just does not quite have that same amount of top coat on it. And then if you didn't notice, this piece was a little bit on the short side. So in our stash of stash, we are going to be adding some legs so it's a little bit taller and off the ground. As you see, it didn't have a bottom, and a lot of these older pieces didn't have a bottom. So Chris is just putting a board inside to be able to put a board on the bottom to give him something to screw some legs onto. And even the best planned out pieces, a lot of times, once you start working on it, you have to rethink it. So I didn't even think about needing to rise this up until I started working on it, going, this is kind of on the short side. So these are actually some legs that I had purchased from Lowe's a while ago that we are going to be putting on there, but I just needed to make sure that I picked out the 4 that match. So now what Chris is doing is he measured the bottom where the screw is on the leg itself, and now he's just going to measure off so he knows where it needs to be pre-drilled into the bottom, and that way he can have all the legs inset, pre-drilled properly, and they're all in the same area. The body of the chest of drawers needs that same couple coatings of the shellac to even out its porosity. It is, one side's a little bit different in the wood color than the other side. It was really hard to get into that middle groove part, but that's okay because that's a detail I want to emphasize. And, you know, there still was some from where it marked in the wood, even though there's not that divot, that scrape anymore, it left a staining behind. Now, after applying that shellac and letting it dry, it raised up that wood grain, so I need to go back in with some fine grit steel wool and making sure that my piece is nice and smooth. And now here's where you can really start to tell that if I went in with a natural stain or even waxed it, it just would not turn out pretty. And it is sad to sand something all the way down to the natural wood and find out it's just not going to be a pretty piece. It was just wood patched too much, and now, yeah, it wasn't, yeah. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cover it all up with black paint. I know it is sad, but I think my vision will still make this piece beautiful. Now we're back to the drawers, and I'm going to do that same fine grit steel wool. The grain is all raised up, it's all rough to the texture, and we need to smooth that back down. So I still do not want to make this a solid black piece. I really do want to add a staining process with all that work of sanding these drawer fronts down. So let's eliminate all that sanding dust that I created from the steel wool, get the edges taped off, and yes, I am going to attempt to still see if I can save these door fronts without having to paint them completely black. Now, since I filled this in with shellac and I even out that porosity, I'm going to be able to control my stain. And all I'm using is Waverly Antiquing Wax. I use this a ton for wood stain. So actually, what I'm going to do is just wipe it on and wipe it off and hope for the best that it doesn't. I know that it's going to not cover up where the hardware was, but I'm hoping since I even out the porosity, those marks where the deep scrapes were, will be hidden a little bit more. So So as you see, you can still see those. You can still see those scrape mark staining. So my idea now is to take some of the Jolie black wax and feather it in, giving it an aged effect to kind of cover up a little bit, take your eye away from those scrape marks, and emphasize this beautiful natural wood with some of this black wax. And I'm not doing it over the entire drawer face. All I'm doing is it is on the sides like this. I'm just gingerly feathering it in, giving that kind of like I've been touched, I've been aged, almost a wood burnt maybe type on those edges. And then what I'll do is I'll put the two drawers together so that it coincides as it's coming down with the 4 drawers. After 2 coats of black paint, you can still see that beautiful wood grain, and I love being able to see the wood grain of a piece. So even with black paint, you can see that beautiful wood grain. So I'm going to go ahead and get this sealed in with a coat of polyacrylic. After my polyacrylic is dry, now I'm going to go back in and sand, making sure that it's nice and smooth with some steel wool, but I want to emphasize all those sharp edges, bringing out a little bit more detail in this piece, and I absolutely love that little beadboard tongue and groove type of line on this, though it was not the easiest to get your sandpaper in, but never worry, like if you accidentally have a little scrape like I just did, I know that I can sand that. This is not my finished yet, that I can make sure that that is gone, but now all I'm doing is just taking that sandpaper in that groove and trying to get back all the way down to that wood that was underneath it all. And then after I have it detailed the way I want, I'm going back in with that fine grit steel wool and see that little mark is all gone. Never stress out. We're not finished yet, y'all. Now that I have all the details sanded, I've sanded it nice and smooth. I've blown all that sand dust the heck out of here, and now it's time to bring that black paint back to life using some natural wax by Howard. And I know a lot of times this is not a detail that most people see, but I take my time to tape off those backs, leaving that little bit of history on these refinished pieces. So is it perfectly imperfect? Oh, heck yeah. But can I still take the eye away from those markings? So I needed to put all 4 drawers back in. I picked out what hardware I want, and this is some that we purchased off of Amazon, and I can tell that it's going to cover up those marks mostly, but as you see, the original hardware was still too wide, that I still need to do some more detail work. And so yes, one of my favorite things to do here on the channel, if you watch my channel from the beginning, is grain sack striping. So what better way to cover up these bleached out spots that are still showing through the stain, but to add a big chunky grain sack stripe right down this middle. So here on a dresser, the most important thing is to make sure that I have my first piece of tape centered. So I'm just double checking that all the way down, because especially since this is a handmade piece, you can't guarantee that the measurements, it seems pretty square to me, but just to make sure that my stripe is not going to go crooked. So I want to make sure that my first stripe is completely covering the original hardware. So I not only am I doing that first piece, but I'm going to do another piece of tape on either side of it to make sure that I have completely covered up those hardware marks. Now that I have my spacing, okay, so now we're going to lay another piece of tape on either side, and this is 2-inch tape. I just order a bulk pack off of Amazon because I go through a lot of tape, but I like this type of tape because it doesn't leave any sticky residue behind, but it also works wonderful as a painter's tape because it does not go underneath the tape. So right now I'm just butting up those pieces of tape on either side, and then I'm going to remove those 3 pieces in the center, and then that's where my paint stripe will go. But before I can proceed on painting my stripe, I need to kind of curve my tape around my drawers so that it looks like it's one long stripe that is just not just touching the drawer fronts themselves. So all I'm doing is taking an X-Acto knife, making a little, trying to make a center cut, and then wrapping around the bottom and the top of the drawers. That way it'll be a complete stripe. But I needed to have my drawers in to make sure that my line was going to stay center. So if I just did this on with the drawers being still on my workbench, it may not have been straight because, yet again, you can't ever guarantee that everything is completely square. Now, before I started to paint, I made sure that I pulled my drawers out just a little bit so I'm not touching that already finished body of the dresser, but I'm using that same, I use the ready-to-use brand off the shelf from Walmart in the black onyx flat sheen paint, and I have used this from day one and absolutely love working with this paint. From my small items to my furniture flips, it's just always been my go-to. So now I want to add another stripe to each side. So I'm going in with some smaller, just regular size masking tape. I'm just eyeballing. Also like this type of tape because I can see through it. So I want to leave a space that's unpainted in between the first big chunky stripe in between my skinny stripe. So I can see through this. I'm going to work my way down, trying to keep it as leveled and even as I can. And then after I get that piece of tape, I'm going to add another piece of tape, but I'm going to leave a space in between the tape. That's where my paint stripe is going to go. And a lot of times I'll make that stripe the same size as the space that's unpainted from the first original middle stripe. Now I could be done and I achieved what I wanted to achieve by covering up that bleached out area from the hardware, but I still want to take away from a little bit of the scraping that I can still see. It's not going to be perfect, y'all. It's that perfectly imperfect of flipping thrifted finds. So now I want to add some numbers. So I just went in, found a font, kind of played with some numbers, trying to see what was visually how to line them up. I mean, it's all a visual. It's all what's pleasing to your eye. So after I got them the way that I wanted them, I'm going to go ahead and size them appropriate to the drawers. And of course, the one drawer is smaller than the other drawers, but just for the ease of visual, I'm going to keep all my numbering, my number 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm just going to keep them all the same size. So all I did was cut them out on permanent vinyl. I used the Oracle 651, weeded them, put them on some gridded transfer tape. I love this transfer tape. That way I can not only cut my vinyl as close to my image to keep it level and straight, I also can line my transfer tape up with my stencil, and then I can actually use the grid pattern when I'm attaching it to the object to make sure that my counting, my squares are all the same. Now this was a waxed piece at the moment, so I haven't finished it quite off yet, so my vinyl's not going to want to stick as easily as I want it to stick, so I might have to just gingerly help it stay down when I'm removing my transfer tape. Because I cut my image so close to my stencil, to my lettering, I always end up adding masking tape so that way when I'm coloring in my stencil using my stencil brush, that I don't go off onto the natural wood. So I'm just doing the dry brush technique. I'm still using that same paint and doing a couple coats to cover. Now after it's all nice and dry, I'm taking some fine grit steel wool because I don't want you to feel where I put that paint. I don't want that sharp edge. So I'm just lightly sanding it, just lightly, until the touch where I don't feel that that is raised. And now I'm going to take all the drawers back out and I'm going to seal these all in with a few coats of the polyacrylic. And I try to always get the matte polyacrylic or the satin. But I really think, it's the perfectly imperfect, but now your eye is drawn to that big green sack stripe and to the numbering. So as I'm working on this piece, I'm always working on multiple pieces, not just one at a time, y'all. Chris gets home from work and wants to know always what he can help with. So I'm like, hey, can you put these hardware pieces on here? So the nice thing is I measured what those were. I knew where my stripe was going to be. These are nice hardware because you actually don't have to use the Craig jig hardware tool because they actually drill in from the front. And then, so yes, all he's doing is just making sure that they are a level. And really, these were easy to put on because I made that first black stripe the same exact size. So you knew where your level was, but you just needed to kind of center it in the middle of the dresser drawer.
Okay, so what did you think? Yeah, just because you take a stain off and you take the top coat off and you get to that raw wood, it may not be pretty underneath there, folks. Just plain and simple. So we needed to dress it back up and get some details on there, and then do some other details, not only paint the piece, but do some other details to distract from the imperfections. They're there, they're staying there, they're that perfectly imperfect I talk about. So I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you've ever run across that where you've taken the time to sand a piece all the way and you're like, oh, it's not nice underneath. Yeah, it just happens, folks. So give me a quick comment down below if you have done this yourself and if you just enjoyed watching today's video. Again, thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you next time, and you can see what we're up to. Bye!